As always, our show is brought to you by Memoria Press. Check out our full line of classical Christian education at memoriapress.com. Then there's a story behind all the primary enrichment. Is there not, Leigh?
Well, I don't know if it's a story.
It's a reality.
It's a reality.
About
That's
a
true.
mom.
That's true. That's true. So,
Welcome to the Homeschool Journal, a show that unpacks the joys and journeys of the classical homeschool family. Here's your host, Carrie McGraw.
Well, welcome, friends, to the Homeschool Journal. And I have back with me today our precious and wonderful Mrs. Leigh Lowe. Leigh, thank you for coming back again.
thank you, Carrie. It's always a treat to be here.
We just keep cycling Leigh right back through. And it's really important because Leigh has so many stories to tell, so many things to share with us. But today we're going to focus on a very specific story. And that is something unique about Memoria Press that has really sat on my heart for a very long time. And I'm excited today to finally get to really open that story up to our viewers and our listeners. And it's about the fact that Memoria Press is unique in the fact that we are a classroom-tested homeschool curriculum. Everything we do runs through our model school, Highlands Latin School, and other Highlands Latin schools.
Absolutely.
Right?
All over the country. That's right.
That's right. And before it's rolled out to our homeschoolers. And this is a long process. It's many years, but we're going to delve into that story today and give you just snapshots of how do we do this? You know, how do we roll this stuff out?
Right. Carrie, this has this was Mrs. Lowe's dream to have a classical curriculum. But to be honest with you, I don't know that she really even intended for it to actually happen. It was just sort of a kernel in the back of her mind. And our parents, very providentially, just sort of pulled from her this curriculum slowly and thoughtfully throughout the years. She started, as you know, in her living room teaching Latin. And I don't know that she ever imagined that Memoria Press would have grown to touch this many people's lives. But families just saw in her such wisdom and such generosity and such intelligence that they said, please give us more. And that's really how the Memoria Press curriculum developed. And so as we've been developing over the last 25 years, almost 25 years, we are conscientious to stay true to her goals and her ideals. But as you can imagine, in the development process, there's always a lot of change. So, that's always a big question with families coming in, and I know that that's what you want to address today is the change that we are kind of constantly undergoing here at Memoria Press.
Yes. And so give them that backstory. How does that all come about? And how organic it really, really is and hands-on.
That's right.
Now, you spoke about family, and for everyone that might not know Leigh, she has 5 beautiful children. Her oldest is in the same grade as my youngest. And so we are experiencing at least those steps together as ninth grade parents.
Wow.
But Leigh, you have been with Mrs. Lowe since before children. Tell us a little bit about that early journey.
That's right. Well, actually, Brian and I are celebrating our 20-year anniversary next month. But we dated for about 8 years before we married. So I actually met Mrs. Lowe when I was a freshman in college. Oh. And actually, I remember visiting for the first time in the summer. And I believe Martin Cawthron was on the patio the first time that I came to their house. And they were having dinner on the patio. And so Martin and Mrs. Lowe were already in cahoots, just thinking deeply about education. And Mrs. Lowe had a small homeschool class in her living room that she was teaching Latin. And Martin was doing some work in education and politics, but they had a vision for classical education and they were already talking. So Mrs. Lowe basically was serving students in our community, just sharing her expertise in Latin with homeschooling families in our communities. And I wasn't a part of Memoria Press or Highlands Latin School or the Cottage School at all. And I just sort of observed from afar for a few years. But during that time, as I became closer with Mrs. Lowe, she was she was always giving me books and she was always talking about wise things. And, she was never gossiping. When we spoke, it was always about sort of exalted topics. And so, even though I wasn't directly involved in my college years. She was
educating you.
She was educating me.
She
was educating me. She was shepherding me toward just an awareness about the educational landscape. So I'm really grateful to her for just sort of opening my eyes in that way.
It was always a mission for her at every step of the way. And she had this vision for each and every person that she came into touch with of, let's give you this. Let's give you this. Let's impart this. And it was always in such a humble and gracious manner that everything was a gift that she gave away.
That's right.
Whether it was a piece of knowledge, a book, or just time or conversation that she gave to anyone. So we remember her beautifully and fondly. But you have hit it. Everyone here, and with you and Brian, particularly at the helm, we are all working to maintain that vision and that mission that was handed to us. So let's get into that a little bit more.
Sure.
Let's get into some specific stories.
Sure.
So that we can open up the doors of Memoria Press, the vaults of Memoria Press for our families, and let them see how it's all happening.
Sure.
Or how it did happen.
Sure.
When we talk about Latin.
Okay, absolutely.
So you started teaching after you had children, right?
Actually, no. I started teaching before Brian and I were even married. And I think one of the main things that you just said that I really want to emphasize is that there is a true spirit of humility. Mrs. Lowe shared everything with such a true spirit of humility, and I think that is one of the defining characteristics of our curriculum. And I think that that's one of the things that we all really try to remember. And so I think that's how I actually became involved. I was not yet married to Brian, and she asked, and I was in graduate school, and I was starting another business, and she invited me to teach with her at her 4-hour-a-week cottage school. Mm-hmm. And she was teaching the older students that she had already sort of shepherded through her little living room school. And we rented 2 classrooms in a church, and my role was to teach the younger students Latin and Roman history and Greek mythology. Mm-hmm. Of course, everyone knows I did not have a classical background. And so she was teaching me everything. And before she released a class to me, she taught me in her garage. We absolutely had classes. She taught me Latin. We read mythology together, Roman history. She really genuinely instructed me. And then she sent me into a classroom with 3 books, and that's it, no materials. And my students were ages 2nd grade through 8th grade. So it was a very, very mixed class. They were all wonderful students, wonderful families. But it was culture shock for me. And so really, I had to do so much preparation in order to teach those classes. Mm-hmm. And that's, how I became involved in writing and development and teaching. And so Latin, Mrs. Lowe, that was her true love.
Yes.
And she had already written Latina Christiana 1 and Latina Christiana 2. And my role in teaching the younger students Latin was to introduce them I was to teach Latina Christiana 1. Well, in my experience was that I would say, well, we need to talk about, a declension. And the students didn't have a real grasp on grammar. Mm-hmm. And so I recognized that for my benefit and also for the benefit of my students, I needed to go back a step. And so so I just prepared notes to give foundational information for the students going into Latina Christiana 1, which is how Prima Latina began. Mm-hmm. And so it was really, again, just, in humility, we recognized, wait a minute, we're not quite ready for this, student and teacher alike. And so we stepped back and we created some foundational materials to help us move along.
Well, I will tell you, I still have in my basement saved some of the original videos that I know that you recorded for Latina Christiana 1. It might also be Prima Latina.
I did all of those. Yes, I did all of those. And I don't know why I agreed to that.
They're wonderful. I keep them.
No, it was a fun project. We learned a lot.
Well, I do want to key in on something that you said just a minute ago, that, you were given these students, you were given, a selection of books, and you were told, go teach. And it was material you'd never taught.
Right.
You hadn't been taught yourself. You didn't have a classical education background. But we say this to our families all the time. Anyone can do this. That's what Mrs. Lowe started with the idea that anyone should be able to do this. And that's, a foundation of what we do is make this beautiful truth, goodness, and beauty available to all families. Open and go. Let's get it out there.
That's right. That's right.
And she did it with you.
She did it with me. And that's what we are constantly doing. I think that is, I think, again, that humility element is such an important part of who we are, because we recognize, as teachers, we tell our teachers, take the tests with your students, read the supplemental information, what is difficult for you as the teacher, and, acknowledge that that's probably difficult for your students as well.
Right.
And so, I try to do that with my own children. So, I have sympathy for their difficulties. And as we're doing that and educating ourselves, all of our entire community, we can see opportunities, and we can see things that would make a lesson easier for students, or supplemental material that really helped us flesh out some material, or some connective information that really enhances a lesson. And so I think that if we have that spirit of learning, as educators, as parents and teachers, I think that really benefits our students.
Well, let's jump to that here. Let's go to the fact that we, like I said, uniquely have Highlands Latin School, which has grown exponentially since, I think, when I first came back in 2004 with one of my kids, it was 100 students, maybe, and it's now, are we almost at 800? I'm not even sure what the count is. I've lost count. I quit asking.
Right.
And that is the model school. Now, it's not the only one. We have several across the country that are full-time Highlands Latin schools.
Right.
We also have Highlands Latin cottage schools, quite a few of those, maybe up to 20 or something like that.
Maybe even more than that.
Probably.
We should have these numbers.
I know, I should have those numbers.
We need to.
Maybe I didn't do all my homework.
I know. I'm constantly asked that. I feel like I need a tick board on the hall upstairs so that I remember.
That's not a bad idea. That may come about after this conversation.
I feel like I'm asked that question so often, and I never know exactly the right answer.
But we're listening to all of these experiences in these schools.
Right.
And again, that goes back to, this, I want to ask you this. How did the growth of Highlands Latin School affect the curriculum process and vice versa? So let's talk about that relationship a little bit.
Sure. So as our cottage school grew, we added classes. So parents asked, would you please teach classical history? Would you please teach Greek mythology? And originally, in the very early days, when we were so small, we were committed to this classical model. And we said, really, if you're teaching Latin well, you're teaching grammar, you're teaching history, you're teaching geography, you're teaching, religion, you're teaching all of these things, because if you're delving deeply into a subject, you can pull so much out. And so our first Memoria Press ad, Brian hand drew, and it said, so many subjects, so little time, simplify your curriculum with Latin. And so Mrs. Lowe had her first guide was an intro to classical studies guide. And so now, while we have all these beautiful books for Christian studies and all these beautiful books for Greek mythology and Roman history and Middle Ages, the first book was a very small guide that incorporated all of that as a supplement to Latin. So when she was teaching Latin, she would teach the classical studies program as a supplement. And so part of what I did when I first started was flesh all of that out. Because again, I needed more content. I needed more materials. And we felt like our teachers would also need, as many resources as we could provide for them. So now we have all of these, we have a Greek mythology guide. We have all the classical studies guides individually. We have a beautiful Christian studies program that has been fleshed out. And so as parents asked more of us, we had to continue to develop our curriculum. So the goals were always in place, but as we developed and served more students and more families and offered more classes, we added things, we refined things, we enhanced things. We never replaced anything.
Mm-hmm.
So Latin never moved. Classical studies never moved. Christian studies never moved. The books that we were teaching 20 years ago, we're still teaching, but we would add and enhance and supplement what are in alignment with our original goals.
Like literature.
Right.
Our selection in literature is deeply thought, deeply practiced.
Right.
It would have been hard to pick just a few of what we would call classics or epics, whether you're in second grade, eighth grade, or high school.
Right.
But those haven't changed.
They really haven't changed. I mean, we had to pick selections, and Mrs. Lowe, she made selections, and there were tweaks along the way and refinements, but she really knew where she wanted students to arrive. And so the curriculum is top down. So I think that's such an important part about the Memoria Press curriculum is that we decided what the goals should be first and worked backwards. Mm-hmm. So it was not a haphazard, what can the kindergartners do? Oh, look ahead.
That's right.
Look. Coincidentally, look what the first graders can do. It was very, very intentional. So in that way, every piece had to be intentional in order to prepare students well for that end goal. And so just like you said, literature is so important because there are so many great books. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy to say, well, this would be a great book in third grade and this would be a great book in fourth grade. And it's true. And, I always say that literature is more like a climbing wall than a ladder. You can take a few different steps. However, if you're making radical changes in every single grade, you're really sort of veering off course, mm-hmm. right? And so while it might be completely justified to make changes in any individual grade, and you can make great arguments for it, if you're looking at the long goal, changing small parts really does affect that journey.
Right, which is the way that she started, which is look at that end goal.
That's right.
This is where we want a student to be.
That's right.
So we need to build backwards.
That's right.
And in that backward step, there are supplemental steps.
That's right.
A kindergartner will get here. A first grader will get here.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
And yet all of it is with that end student in mind.
That's right. And we had conversations about the intentionality of the King James Bible scripture memorization in preparation for, the beautiful words of Shakespeare. And,
mm-hmm.
The difficulty of, rich content of Dante. And so, these things are very, very intentional. Starting poetry in kindergarten, all of those things are just small steps that, aren't quite so noticeable, little by little by little, but in the end, just.
But if we go back to the evolution of literature, if I may call it that.
Sure.
Very specifically, we had these books that had been selected with the end goal in mind, grade by grade by grade. Okay. But poetry, where did that come in? Right. Because that's another part of this process. We're in the school.
Right.
We know what we're doing in literature.
Right.
But then we want to introduce.
Right. So some of the poetry was included. Horacious has been involved since the very
mm-hmm.
beginning. And actually, our Horacious memorization challenge actually was student-led. We had a student many, many years ago who just said, I memorized the whole thing. Oh. And so Mrs. Lowe used to ask students to memorize some, and this student just went above and beyond. And Mrs. Lowe always talked about dunking the basketball. Until you can see somebody dunk the basketball, you think it's so difficult. And then you realize, oh, it's possible. And that's kind of how the Horacious challenge developed. A student did, and I know Winston Churchill did, and I know, it has been noted in history, but for our students, that was a student-led
that is
activity.
A story I never knew.
Yeah. So actually we had that student come a few years ago and hand out the Horacious Awards. She's local here in town. And so it was a real treat because she's the one that started something that's so important to our culture. So I kind of veered off course there, but Horacious and some of the poetry was, already involved, but we did the literature guides, and then we recognized that poetry is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Just contemplation about beautiful words is really, really valuable. And so we kind of went backwards, actually, in that way. So we started with some poetry in the younger grades because we recognized that, those students need to begin just memorizing beautiful words from the very beginning. They need to be comfortable with exalted language, with beautiful themes. And so we added some of that for the younger grades, and then sort of supplemented the literature and the poetry as we went along.
But then there's a story behind all the primary enrichment. Is there not, Leigh?
Well, I don't know if it's a story.
It's a reality.
It's a reality.
About
That's
a
true.
mom.
That's true. So I was involved, and I was just soaking up Mrs. Lowe's wisdom for about 5 years teaching, and anything she told me to do, I just said yes, ma'am, and taught. I taught in kindergarten. One year I taught kindergarten, and then when the students were in nap time, another teacher would come in and supervise while I went and taught 8th grade classical studies. And so just whatever she needed me to do, I just said, yes, ma'am. And just, tried my best to be well prepared and do her that task justice. But I did step away when I had children. We had 5 children in 7 years. And so I was home with my children, and the enrichment guide sort of happened because I was just sitting on the floor with my children vetting books. Mm-hmm. And we did not have really a primary enrichment program at that time. And I was sort of developing it as I raised my young children on the floor of my house. And so there were just always stacks of books everywhere. And then finally I had this, all these stacks in this, basic outline for a program. And I think Tanya probably was about had a heart attack when I said, look at this. And so she actually would come to my house when the children were young, and I would say, these are the selections here, and these are the selections here. And we would read through them together, and we would and we kind of developed the enrichment program based on what I knew was coming for my children when they entered Highlands Latin School in kindergarten in preparation. And what I knew as 3rd grade teacher, that was where I really taught the longest, was 3rd grade. And so I was working on what could I do to enhance the foundation of those students who will enter a Highlands Latin School grammar program. And so that's how the enrichment program, that was sort of the impetus for the enrichment program.
But it's about a mom on the floor with her young ones, 5 kids in 7 years. And that's what I want our families to hear today. Yes, we're talking a lot about the evolution of this curriculum in a school, but this is how we get it out to the families. It is still a family process.
It is.
And everyone is involved. I mean, I know, we talked briefly about this before, that really the vetting process for any of our curriculum is kind of like a 2-year minimum.
Oh, right.
Is it not? I mean, as it goes through with teachers and all of that.
Right. So any new material has probably been in the back of someone's mind for a number of years. And then when we develop something, we usually give it to our teachers, and we'll ask them to use it in the classroom. And we always ask our teachers to make notes for us and to offer edits and recognize errors and make suggestions. And in fact, and they always do. And we are constantly editing based on that information. Mm-hmm. In fact, we actually ask new teachers to come in and teach their materials up and down the curriculum so that we have additional eyes on the materials. And those suggestions, those changes, we keep a file with all of those, and parents too. So our teachers make those kinds of suggestions. For instance, last week, for example, our kindergarten teacher said, well, in our spelling list this week, we have 2 words with silent K, and the students haven't learned silent K yet. And so we said, okay, that's a refinement that we need to make. And so the next time that book goes to print, we're going to select 2 different words. And so it's always, sometimes it's small things, sometimes it's larger things, but it's always in an effort to just improve the materials and make it easier and better for our students and our parents.
And it's not just about striving to improve, or, the impact of making sure that we address something that someone has found. The point is, we're listening.
Right.
We
Absolutely.
are always listening to teachers, not just here in Louisville.
Right.
Right. I mean, we've got teachers, in other cities that are doing the same thing, that are contacting us in the same way.
Right.
To say, this maybe we need something different here, you know, and we're listening.
Absolutely.
And it may not always lead to a change.
Right.
But we're listening to parents too.
Absolutely. We all read the forum. We stay on top of that. I don't particularly respond, but I do definitely read. And most often just to take the advice of these amazing women on the forum and men on the forum. And so we are definitely listening, and we want the suggestions because, the people who are implementing our curriculum really have the best information for us, and they can tell us how, where there are glitches, where there are opportunities, what they love that we can replicate in other materials. And so it's definitely an organic, ongoing process.
And it's a process that we try to be very humble about.
That's right.
This is that's why we listen.
Right.
You said you started out with that story of humility of Mrs. Lowe. She humbly gave.
Right.
And so we strive to stay in that virtue.
Right.
At all times, and humbly provide the best that we can.
Right.
And also acknowledge sometimes, we may have to make an adjustment of some sort.
Right.
And listen to that, but never stop striving as well. I think it was either you or Tanya who talked about our curriculum as a living and breathing curriculum that can create some frustration.
That's probably Tanya. He was talking about frustration.
Might have been
Tanya. And I'm the smile, and Tanya's the one that gets the headache. So,
and it's not just frustration for those who are, in it and having to make the edits or anything like that. It's maybe sometimes, families are going, okay, maybe you need to look at this.
Right.
But we listen.
Right.
And we humbly say, okay, we can do better.
Right. And that it is, that is a caveat to this process as well. It is frustrating when there are changes. And certainly people like myself who like things to stay the same, and you like to know what to expect. That can be a little bit of a challenge. And so we try to be generous in terms of replacing materials or, offering exchanges or things like that. So it really kind of affects just our general way of treating our customers well, just in gratitude for their perseverance, for, our commitment to, constantly seeking to provide the best education that we can.
And in our acknowledgement of the grand and great and glorious work that they are doing in their homes. They are on mission with us, saving Western civilization one student at a time.
Absolutely. So, we're so honored that people would join this journey with us. And so, we really are grateful for the feedback and for the patience and for the encouragement and the support and the commitment to this goal that we are all striving toward.
That's right. And, before this podcast, I did a little bit of, searching on the web, and I was looking for any information on homeschool curriculum used in a classroom, homeschool curriculum tested in a classroom. I can't even remember all the words I put into the search bar, but nothing really came up about this unique feature that I know that we possess. What did, interestingly enough, come up was several rankings on best homeschool curriculum, and we hit them. Well, we were on them.
Well, that is a fruit of a lot of people's hard work.
But see, exactly how you put that is the humble way in which I pray that we have and continue to approach this curriculum, that it is a mission and it is a fruit, and it's meant to be a fruit in the homes of those that we touch and work with. And for us, that's a very personal thing. I try to be very personal with any of the homeschoolers that I get to contact. So you're welcome to contact me anytime you want to. That's what I'm here for.
Absolutely.
But so many of us are.
Right. Exactly. And I love conference week because I love talking to other schools, other parents. And I can't, probably the most frequent statement out of my mouth is, "Oh, what a great idea. We should do that." And so, we learn so much. We visit schools all the time, and, we're in close contact and communication with our customers. And I would say even friendship. I feel like so many of our customers are really friends. And so I think that, that matters to us. And,
it does matter.
and I think that our community appreciates that exchange with each other, and just that openness about, what they're doing and what ideas they have and what's working and what's not working, and just the accessibility to ask questions and get, just really generous responses. I think, is something that distinguishes Memoria Press as well.
I think so too. I would like to think so, but maybe I'm biased. Maybe.
We're probably biased.
But I do wish some days that our customers could just be like here in the halls and listening to the conversations and understanding that, it's not just a business, it's a mission. And that's how we carry ourselves here. And even though they can't, I pray that they find ways to connect with us, whether it's our podcasts, whether it's, videos on the YouTube channel. We keep putting out all these fun and wonderful and incredible videos,
right.
And the way that we put together teaching guidelines, whether it's in the books or whether it's on YouTube, or the forum. Just connect with Memoria Press, because that's really what we want to do. We want to stay connected with our customers. We will stay on mission. Right. But this living, breathing, classroom-tested curriculum, we want to make available to all. Leigh, thank you for helping me tell the story. You have just the most beautiful perspective. I would bet you that I could probably name some of those early families, though, that were in her living room.
You probably
I think
can.
I went to church with some of them.
I bet you probably can. And they're wonderful. And what's great now is that we're getting some of their children.
Of their children.
That's right. And then our students will come back and teach for us. So we're a generation down now, and it's really fun to see those students and how that education has impacted their families. And so that's really a treat.
That's awesome. Leigh, thank you again.
Thank you for having me. It's always a joy to be here.
Thanks everybody for being with us and listening to the story of Memoria Press's classroom-tested curriculum. Thanks for joining us today. If you liked our episode, click the thumbs up button below or leave a comment to let us know what you thought. It always helps us to know if we've helped you. You can also click the bell icon and subscribe to the show so that you can stay in touch. Then I'd love for you to share it with a friend. We have many resources here on this channel, so I hope you'll check those out too. I'm Carrie McGraw. Thanks for listening today, and I'll see you next time.